Scientists believe that a large proportion of children born during the Stone Age may never have survived into adulthood. Around 20,000 years ago, during the peak of the last ice age, human life was radically different from anything we know today. There were no schools, no hospitals, no modern safety, and no guarantees of survival. So, what was a single day like for a Stone Age child? How did they live? What did they learn? And how did they survive in a world filled with constant danger? For decades, this remained one of archaeology's greatest mysteries, as children left very few direct traces in the archaeological record. Unlike tools or animal bones, childhood rarely fossilizes in a visible way. But this changed dramatically with a series of remarkable discoveries that began to reshape our understanding of prehistoric life. One of the most striking of these discoveries came from White Sands National Park in New Mexico, where researchers uncovered hundreds of human footprints preserved in ancient lakebed sediments, dating back approximately 21,000 to 23,000 years. Among these footprints, scientists identified many belonging to children, some traveling long distances alongside adults across wet, prehistoric landscapes. According to studies published in journals such as Science, these footprints provide some of the clearest direct evidence ever found of how Ice Age children lived and moved within their communities. Rather than being left behind at shelters, children were actively involved in daily group activities from a very young age. Archaeologist Rebecca Ragg-Sykes suggests that such findings reveal that Stone Age children were not passive observers, but essential members of their social groups, constantly learning through movement, observation, and participation in survival tasks. During this period, roughly 20,000 years ago, global temperatures were around 4 to 6 degrees Celsius colder than today, and vast ice sheets covered large parts of the northern hemisphere. In Europe and Asia, cold grasslands stretched across the landscape, inhabited by herds of mammoths, reindeer, and other Ice Age megafauna. Human groups lived in small bands of roughly 20 to 50 individuals, relying entirely on hunting and gathering for survival. There was no stored food security, no permanent settlement stability, and every single day required adaptation and awareness. It is within this harsh and unstable world that a Stone Age child would wake up, stepping into a reality where every moment carried both opportunity and risk, and where survival itself depended on learning how to read the natural world from the very beginning of life. As the sun rises higher, and the cold mist of the Ice Age morning slowly begins to fade, the real day of a Stone Age child begins, not in a classroom, but in the vast and unforgiving natural world that serves as both teacher and test. The child follows the adults out of the shelter, stepping into endless cold grasslands shaped by the last ice age, where distant herds of reindeer move across the horizon and every track on the ground tells a hidden story. To modern eyes, these marks in the soil might seem meaningless, but for Ice Age hunter-gatherers, they are a language of survival. A footprint can reveal what animal passed, how fast it moved, and how recently it was there, turning the landscape into a living map of opportunities and danger. Archaeologist Stephen Mythen has argued that this deep observational awareness was central to how prehistoric children learned, as they absorbed knowledge not through formal instruction but through constant immersion in real-world experience alongside adults. One of the most important skills they developed was the ability to read nature itself. From broken branches that might signal the passage of large animals to subtle changes in bird behavior that could indicate approaching threats. Yet perhaps the most astonishing evidence supporting this way of life once again comes from White Sands, where researchers found child footprints stretching over long distances, sometimes more than a kilometer, showing that children were not simply staying near shelters, but actively traveling with adult groups during daily survival activities. This discovery strongly supports the idea that Stone Age children were deeply integrated into the economic and social life of their communities, learning through participation rather than isolation, as suggested by archaeologist Rebecca Ragg-Sykes. At the same time, survival also depended on mastering the natural environment's edible resources, requiring children to learn which plants were safe to eat, which were poisonous, and how seasonal changes affected food availability. Archaeological evidence from pollen, seeds, and plant remains found at ancient sites shows that hunter-gatherers possessed an extraordinary understanding of their ecosystems, knowledge that was carefully transmitted across generations. Children were expected to absorb this information early, because a single mistake in identifying food sources could be fatal in such a harsh environment. Beyond foraging, they also began learning how tools were made, with archaeologists finding small, roughly shaped stone artifacts that may have been practice pieces created by inexperienced hands possibly children learning the first steps of craftsmanship. According to anthropologist Pat Shipman, this transfer of skills between generations was one of the key evolutionary advantages of Homo sapiens, allowing knowledge to accumulate over time rather than being lost. Yet, even as children learned to read landscapes, gather food, and experiment with tools, they were also gradually being prepared for something far more dangerous, because in the Ice Age world, survival was never guaranteed. And the greatest lessons often came from the threats that lurked just beyond sight. But the greatest danger for a Stone Age child was not always hunger or even predators, but the unpredictable force of the Ice Age environment itself. Around 20,000 years ago, during the last glacial maximum, climate instability shaped every aspect of human survival. Sudden cold spells, shifting migration routes of animals, and unpredictable seasonal changes could determine whether an entire group survived or vanished. According to paleoanthropologist Chris Stringer, the ability of Homo sapiens to adapt to rapidly changing environments was one of the key reasons our species survived while others disappeared. For children growing up in this world, learning meant more than knowledge. It meant survival training from the earliest age. Every observation, every mistake, and every experience became part of a survival system passed down through generations. Archaeological evidence also reveals something even more remarkable about these early communities. Skeletal remains found across Europe show individuals who suffered severe injuries, such as broken bones or debilitating conditions, yet survived for years after these events. This strongly suggests that Stone Age groups practiced deep social cooperation, caring for injured or vulnerable members who would not have survived alone. Anthropologist Pat Shipman has highlighted this as one of the defining advantages of early human societies, where survival depended not just on individual strength, but on collective support and shared responsibility. For a child, this meant growing up in a world where survival was not a solitary struggle but a group effort, where knowledge, food, and protection were shared within tightly bonded communities. As night falls across the Ice Age landscape, families would gather around firelight, and this simple act of gathering carried profound importance. According to archaeologist Stephen Mithen, these fireside moments likely played a crucial role in the development of language, culture, and social learning, as stories of hunts, dangers, and survival were passed from one generation to the next. A Stone Age child sitting by the fire, listening to these stories, may not have fully understood them, but each narrative became a building block of memory and identity. Over time, this oral transmission of knowledge allowed human societies to preserve experience long before the invention of writing. And perhaps the most astonishing realization of all is that despite the vast distance of over 20,000 years, Stone Age children were not fundamentally different from children today. They were curious, observant, and constantly learning from the world around them. The only difference was that their classroom was not built of walls and desks, but of Ice Age plains, wild landscapes, and a world where every lesson was directly tied to survival. And it is through these traces, footprints in ancient mud, stone tools left behind, and the careful work of modern scientists that we are finally able to glimpse their world with unprecedented clarity.